I'll join palms. And repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. Thanks for showing up. Anyone here for the first time? Those who are here for the first time, what brings you here? Yeah, you didn't know there'd be a question after that, sorry. Who wants to go first? Well, you I know, because you went into the restroom and you didn't know where it was, so I know. Go ahead, whoever.
It's my first time checking it out. I'm here with a friend.
Nice.
So,
Well, welcome.
thank you.
Yeah.
I live in the San Francisco Bay Area and have heard wonderful things about your temple, and so it's an honor to get to come.
Beautiful. So they're talking about us up in the Bay Area, huh?
Hey.
We better tone it down a little bit. We've been trying to hide out a long time. I don't want people to know about us. You know, the first 2 years we literally wanted to exist without even really legally existing at all. I mean, for years we had, well, we still have, we've never had a sign. I mean, did you see the Dharma Bum Temple sign out there? No. The funny thing about the downtown temple was, so we were there for 10 years and never had a sign, right? You could literally walk right by and you would have thought you were going by some condo or something like that. It was this big glass window with that black Buddha that's in the entryway that was in the window. You had no idea what was inside there at all. And so when we were finally leaving after 10 years to come here, somebody said to me, like, hey, are you going to put a sign up that says, like, you've moved? And I laughed, and I was like, well, we never had a sign that said we were here. So why would we put a sign that says we moved, you know? So it was always really like this thing, like, we just wanted to hide out, you know? But yeah, I guess my ego thinks it's kind of cool that they're talking about us up there. Have you been to San Francisco Zen Center, spent time there at all?
Yeah.
Very special, huh?
Very.
Yeah. Are you like a regular there?
Not at this stage in my life, but I was at one point.
Yeah. That book, Crooked Cucumber, written by Suzuki Roshi, who built really the San Francisco Zen Center, is what, from the early days till now, still has guided me with this place. Yeah, he's probably what I've learned the most from his teachings. Yeah. Well, welcome. Glad you're here. Yeah. And another hand.
Hi, Brenda. I'm happy to be here.
What'd your friend say to get you here?
If I wanted to come and experience.
That's pretty easy. Nice. Well, thank you to those who were brave enough to come with a friend and check it out. A friend dragged me to one of these things 20 years ago, so be careful what could happen to you. Anyone else for the first time here? Yeah?
A friend of mine taught me Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and I wrote a song with it, and I just used to call it.
Beautiful. Well, we're glad you're here, and welcome. Thanks for being here. All right. To those who are joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. We'll start with a meditation practice. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside the room, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you are in a cushion, often it'll help slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward. If you're on a bench or chair, however you're seated, also just trying to sit up straight. Relax the shoulders, hands are on the knees or lap, whatever's comfortable for you. Most important, especially if you're brand new, you're not going to shut your mind off. It's not going to go blank. You're not going to think nothing. You end up sitting there telling yourself, think nothing, think nothing, think nothing, and it's just not going to happen. I will guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence, and I'll say things periodically to either wake you up or remind you that you're lost in thought and bring you back to the present moment. Most important, do not expect anything. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. Eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. Expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. the body's still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And when ready, slowly open the eyes. Slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samutpata. It means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in and where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It is direct perception into the present moment. And the present moment is often filled with conflict, chaos, difficulties, challenges. This is life. That's what we get. This practice is learning to be with life as it arises, as opposed to doing what most do when things get challenging, which is just run. And then you spend your whole life running. And then you end up here. And you sit. And you create the opportunity to look honestly and genuinely at what you've been running from your whole life. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and everybody else you encounter every moment of your life, and that's it. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything and everyone around us, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets simpler. But it is a practice. And it takes time, requires patience. Thankfully, which is the one thing I know that everyone in this room is great with. So, just be patient. Try not to be so critical of all your thoughts and all your words and all your actions. But be mindful of them, be aware of them. The Buddha called this karma. It's what we think, what we say, and what we do. It's not what we get, it's not what we deserve, it's not what goes around comes around, it's what we bring into the world. What we bring into the world every moment of our existence is with our thoughts and our words and our actions. And so this practice is an opportunity not to fix anyone else, not to change anyone else, not to point fingers at anyone else. We've done most of that our entire lives. But this practice is an opportunity to, again, very honestly look at your thoughts, your words, and your actions. That's it. And see how that impacts the life of yourself and the life of those around you. And as the Buddha taught, don't believe this stuff just because he said it. You don't have blind faith in the Buddhist teachings. He was just a dude, just a human, no different than anyone in this room. He said, try these things, put them into your life. If they make you kinder and gentler and make the world a kinder, gentler place, then bring it into your life, practice it. If not, abandon it. That's up to you. So, with that, I'll pause. For me, I always really just prefer to respond to questions. Meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. And we'll use the rest of our brief time this evening for that. For those who are joining virtually, again, welcome. Glad you're here. Feel free as you are to say hello. If you have any questions, put them on the chat box. I'll do my best to respond. So we'll open up to questions.
I signed up for a 10-day Vipassana course at the end of January.
Right on.
I forget which, the one in 29 Palms, I forget what it's called.
Go Inca.
Yes. I am simultaneously I want to go in with no expectations, but I obviously want to get something out of it. And also is there anything you would recommend I prepare in any way for?
Yeah, so beautiful. Glad you're doing it. For those never heard of this, Esen Goenka was a beautiful Buddhist teacher. It's a Vipassana insight meditation practice. They have them literally all over the world. The closest, one of the closest, I think, 29 Palms, I think, is the closest one. And they're 10-day silent retreats. And the only recommendation I have for you is to not think about it at all until the moment you get there. You know, meditation retreats, meditation practice, whether it's 10 minutes or 10 days or 10 years, it's not like a marathon where you train for it, build up, you know. I mean, most people probably couldn't go out tomorrow and run a marathon, right? I mean, maybe you could, I don't know. But there are things that we train for in our lives, that we build up, we build stamina, strength, you know, endurance. You're just going to sit with your own madness, second after second after second, breath after breath after breath, and you don't prepare for that. The fact that you said, I think you said you're both excited and, I don't know, did you say terrified or did I just read that from your face? That word works, right?
Yeah.
So you're both excited and terrified. So even though I say to you, don't think about it until you get there, I know you're not going to do that. You're going to think about it. And your emotions and thoughts and feelings will range from excitement to terror. Beautiful. Recognize those emotions that you're having going into it. All of them as temporary. All of them as impermanent. All of them as an illusion. None of them being real. And when you get there, sit down, shut up, and be with yourself for 10 days. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And most likely you'll survive. I've probably sent 1,000 people on that retreat. I'm not even kidding. And I've never heard anything negative. And I'm not saying that to like plant an expectation.
Yeah.
You know, they're not easy. It's 10 days with yourself.
Yeah.
You know? Most people, the only thing you can do for 10 days straight is watch Netflix. So 10 days in silence will be 10 days in silence, but one breath at a time, you'll be great. Yeah. And it'll suck. What else?
That's just so powerful. It'll be great and it'll suck. And that's so much about life, right?
That's life. Whether it's a 10-day silent retreat or whether it's traffic or whether it's work or school or relationships, it'll be great and they'll suck all at the same time. Isn't that amazing? You know? And if you go into life knowing that, it makes life so much easier. You know, I mean, the Buddha wasn't lying when he said life is filled with dukkha, suffering, discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction. Right? It's filled with all of that. But in all of that is also joy and happiness and, you know, wonderful things also. So it is. It's that kind of finding that balance and just watching life as it occurs and not getting swept away by it too much. Yeah. What else? Thoughts, questions? Yeah.
So sometimes when I'm meditating, my head's telling me, you're failing.
You're what? Oh, you're failing.
I'm failing because I have so many thoughts and I'm like, what is successful meditation? Like if I had 5 seconds of actually being able to focus on my breath, and then my mind goes on a 2-minute story and I'm like, I was just focusing on breathing. How did I go on a 2-minute story? Like what is successful meditation?
You're in a great seat for this question. And here's why. Right? Show of hands by anyone who was able to stay focused on their breath for more than like a half a second and didn't have a million thoughts for 20 minutes. Show of hands from anyone who didn't have a million thoughts for 20 minutes. Liar.
Oh, wait. Okay. I got mixed up.
You got it mixed up. Well, there you go.
I heard something completely.
Right? So you can't fail at meditation. I understand where you're going with this, and this is a common question, and I'm sure you're not the only one in this room that feels this way. Often in our lives, well, not often, but almost always in our lives, we are taught to gain, to get better, to achieve, to accomplish, to improve, right? I mean, when you were in second grade, parents or teachers, nobody said like, yo, you're doing great, just stay in second grade your whole life, right? I mean, it's just from the moment we're born, nothing we do is ever enough. Ever. Everyone's pushing us to be better and stronger and faster and just achieve, everything about life is pushing. And so we become conditioned. All right, this Buddhist teachings around just understanding the conditioning, the law of cause and effect that we have experienced throughout our lives. So our minds have become conditioned. We've created this construct. Buddhism, they talk about 5 skandhas without getting too far into that. We've created these stories, these aggregates, these ideas in our heads that function psychologically how we work, or explain psychologically how we work, which is we have an idea that we're supposed to be better and gain. And that's the problem. So the practice of sitting, it's not about failing or doing it properly. It's not about getting better or worse. It's about recognizing that when you sit, you have a million thoughts. That's what's going on. Don't grade your meditation, I suggest. Don't give it some label. Defeats the entire practice of meditation. The Buddha taught very clearly in the Anapanasati Sutra. He said, if you're breathing in and taking a short breath, simply observe you're breathing in and taking a short breath. If you're breathing out and taking a long breath, simply observe you're breathing out and taking a long breath. If you're having a bunch of thoughts, simply observe you're having a bunch of thoughts. Don't think you're failing. Make sense so far? Okay. Now that we've clarified that, here's what I'm going to suggest. Meditation practice is not to just sit there for 20 minutes and think about a bunch of shit, which is the reality of what most people in this room just did. Right? So by that definition, we all failed. How do you feel being around a bunch of other failures, right? Sitting for 20 minutes and thinking about random stuff is sitting for 20 minutes and thinking about random stuff. But we put it in this context, in this framework. Somebody sits here, they hit a bell, you call it Buddhism, you're like, I meditated for 20 minutes. You know? Training the mind is the recognition of, there go the thoughts, back to the breath. There go the thoughts, back to the breath. But the reason I start with the judgment failing aspect of it is you have to set that aside. And once you stop judging yourself, which you've probably done your whole life with everything else in your life, which is usually what leads most people to this practice, we spend our whole life judging ourselves, we're not good enough, so we end up in Buddhism. Or therapy and Buddhism, or both. Right? And here we are. So the practice of training the mind, which is what meditation is, right? So for me, breath in, this is what I'm working on every single day. Never changes. Breath in, breath out. Thought arises, recognize it. Release that thought, back to breath. Breath in, breath out. 2 seconds later, thought arises, hunger. Recognize it, release it, back to the breath. Next thought, hunger. Recognize, release, back to the breath. It's a constant recognition of every single thought that arises and a training of the mind to come back to the present moment. What I don't want to do, thought arises, hunger. Oh, I'm going to bring that thought back. I'm hungry. Now comes the story. What do I want to eat? I want a burrito. I'm going to go to Pokies. I want chips. I want sauce. I'd like some more water. Next thing you know, from one single thought of hunger, I'm sitting here for 5 minutes thinking about a burrito. And now I'm hungrier than I was 5 minutes ago. And I still don't have a burrito. Right?
Visually push that thought out, like almost like in a vision, like I'm pushing it away.
So in a way, you can technically visualize pushing it away, but by visualizing pushing it away, you're giving it life. Instead of visualizing pushing it away, visualize coming back to the breath. Use the breath as your anchor. You know the beautiful thing about the breath as an anchor is it's always there. And when you don't have the breath, you don't have to worry about meditation anymore. Right? So whether you visualize the breath, whether you hear the breath, whether you feel the breath through the nose, the nostrils, right? If you have bad breath, whether you smell the breath, whatever is going on, observe the breath. Because if you focus on one thing and one thing only, what are you not focused on?
Thoughts.
Everything else. And when you focus on everything else, how does that tend to make you feel? Scattered, anxious, stressed out, angry, sad, depressed, miserable, right? Sadness, anger, depression is in the past. Stress, anxiety, fear, worries in the future. That's where we spend all the time. As an example, without looking, can you see what's on the wall behind you? No. If you turn around and look at it, you can see it. So the past is there, the wall behind you is there, your thoughts are there, but you're focused forward right now. You see the difference? Yeah. And that's the training, and that's a big mistake most people make. It's like, I'm going to meditate to escape. You know, give me the bubble baths, give me the candles, give me like my quiet little place. Everyone just shut the hell up so I can meditate. No, that's escaping. And as I say always, don't come here, don't cultivate a meditation, Buddhist practice to escape. You're actually defeating the purpose of what the Buddha was talking about. This is not an escape. This is direct perception into the present moment. And if your mind is racing everywhere, then work to train it to be present. Anyone been angry about something for 20 years? Your mind is still there. Come back to present moment. That's why we do this stuff. Or one example of why. So we can learn to be with life as it arises. Because if we're lost in all the past, then we're missing the beauty of what is here right now. Yeah?
So there's a practice I do that's identify the thought, and then is it a thought or a feeling, and then after that, is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral?
Beautiful.
Is there value in that?
100%. Yeah, ignore everything I just said. Do that.
What is the purpose of that?
So what is the purpose of that? So here's the thing. Even within Buddhist practice, right? You have what the Buddha taught. You have insight, vipassana meditation from Theravada Buddhism, right? The old school, original teachings of the Buddha. You have 500-600 years later, the development of Mahayana Buddhism, Zen practice. For me, I'm a Zen practitioner. So what I was just describing in words is the closest I can do to make sense of, for me, what my training was to sit, right? What you're talking about is more insight practice, a deep understanding of, as the Buddha says, are these thoughts and feelings and emotions and sensations that arise, are they pleasant, are they unpleasant, or neutral? Very fundamental, basic, kind of one-on-one Buddhism. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. All of our thoughts, all of our emotions, all of our sensations can be categorized as pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So what somebody either personally told you or read in some book from some school of Buddhism, that's exactly what that practice is. And that's a beautiful practice. To begin to recognize throughout our day, are the thoughts and feelings I'm having pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And then understand them, right? One practice, kind of back to the first question, which you'll hear a lot of people talk about, kind of when you talk about pushing it away. One example I heard years ago was somebody shared, and I thought it was really beautiful. Imagine the thought arises, put it in an envelope. Imagine you're sealing it, putting a stamp on it, and sending it off, right? Imagine the thoughts are just like clouds or planes that get louder over your head, and they pass. Clouds are just passing. 1,000 people will lead you in meditation 1,000 different ways. I don't like to say any of them are right or wrong or good or bad. If that's beneficial for you and it helps you, absolutely do it. Does that make sense? Have you been doing that
I
practice?
do that when I'm here with you, because
And
thoughts come up, I just say now thinking, and then that just leads me to go back to the breath.
yeah, and it helps you.
Yeah.
It's beneficial for you.
What happens to me throughout the day now? When my thought goes crazy, and I think my brain goes wild, I'm like, I'm doing it, and then I come back to the breath.
So if I heard you correctly, what you just said at the end is you are actually doing that during the day.
Real life, yeah. Like
Yes.
as I'm
Real life? Really? You do this stuff in real life? Amazing. But so that's ultimately what it comes down to is forget what I say, forget what the Buddha said, forget what school of Buddhism you're looking at. And if this stuff is helping you be less crazy during the day, if Donald Duck said it, beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. What else? Yes, there's a question here. Can I briefly explain the different schools of Buddhism? So briefly, and thanks for saying briefly, which then I could actually just repeat your words instead of me saying I'll briefly explain them. You have, at the time of the Buddha, when he was born 2,500 years ago, the kind of first school of Buddhism, it initially was called Hinayana. Then you have Mahayana, Vajrayana. The word yana here, Y-A-N-A, means vehicle. Hinayana is lesser, and I'll talk about this in a minute. Mahayana, Maha is greater. Vajra is diamond. So you had a lesser vehicle, greater vehicle, and a diamond vehicle. They eventually came together, and I'll break them down. But they eventually came together, and they changed Hinayana to Theravada because they didn't feel it was appropriate to refer to one school of Buddhism as greater than the other. So Theravada literally means of the elders. And so a lot of people will say that that's the original teachings of the Buddha. But you have to keep in mind that when the Buddha taught, it was an oral transmission of the teaching. So everything he said was memorized. And then at some point, I'm not a scholar, but even scholars debate somewhere 50, 75, 100 years after he died, they came together and they said, in essence, this is some good stuff, we should write it down. So the sutras, the word sutra means thread, it comes from like the word suture. And the thread of these teachings, for the most part, the early sutras, the Theravada sutras, which is in what's called the Pali Canon, P-A-L-I, the sutras start out with, at such and such place, at such and such time, the Buddha once said, right, with such and such people. So it's a retelling of what they heard the Buddha say. These were the teachings that kind of existed for about 500 years. Again, Hinayana or Theravada Buddhism, Pali Canon. The Vipassana practice, the insight practice, really comes from this. Then 500 years later, roughly turn of the century, Buddhism goes north, China, Japan, Korea. You have the development of Mahayana Buddhism. And Zen, Pure Land Buddhism, you have different schools within Mahayana. Even Zen had initially like 20-something different schools and then broke down kind of the surviving two, which is a Soto or Rinzai Zen. And then about 1,000 years after the Buddha died, it goes into Tibet, and you have Vajrayana Buddhism. Vajrayana Buddhism is still kind of considered, for the most part, Mahayana Buddhism, but it really kind of focused hardcore in Tibet with Tibetan rituals and color and loud and a lot of really cool, wonderful, spiritual, like flamboyant stuff, which is really fun. The main difference between the three, they're not killing each other over them, they're not fighting with each other over them, but Theravada Buddhism, the original kind of old school teachings of the Buddha, was really all about the individual awakening themselves. So even here locally in San Diego, for those of you who've been to Metaforest Monastery, those are Thailand's Thai Forest Theravada monks. And they are living as close to the Pali Canon, the original teachings of the Buddha, and they follow the Vinaya, which is the code of conduct for the monks. There were 227 precepts. You go to Metaforest Monastery in Escondido, and you'll see about 12 monks living the life of the Buddha. And they're there not to make you feel all warm and fuzzy. They're not there to make sure you learn about Buddhism. They're living their life. And they're practicing as monks in the forest, so to speak, right? In the mountains of Escondido, right? They're there to awaken. Because the view is that, how can I help you if I'm an unenlightened, ignorant fool, which I am? Maybe I'm harming you all right now. Who knows? What I'm saying is, it's dangerous because people actually listen to what I say, surprisingly. So I have to be careful with what I say because karmically that's leaving an imprint on you. And so for me as an unenlightened practitioner, that's dangerous. People show up here and listen to all of us who lead here, not just me. There's probably 15 different people who lead. And you are listening to 15 unenlightened, ignorant folks who are just practitioners. Keep that in mind. Right? Mahayana Buddhism, which practices, and Vajrayana both kind of come under the same boat of what's called the Bodhisattva practice. Bodhisattva, Thich Nhat Hanh coined a phrase engaged Buddhism, but Bodhisattva means enlightened being. Bodhisattva is a practice that says, my practice as a Mahayana Bodhisattva practitioner is that I'm going to help others while I'm on the journey. But again, how do I know what I'm doing to help people is actually helping them? A simple example, somebody falls, obviously we think, pick them up. But is picking them up always the best thing? We don't know. Right? I, as a practitioner, err on the side of I'm going to pick them up. Maybe me leaving them there was the best thing for them. So kind of two different approaches, both beautiful, both important. That's brief.
So follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
You wanted to get more backstory to some of the things that you mentioned. You say a lot of words that I have no idea what you're saying.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I try. Which ones? I'll try to explain them all.
Also, I like to know history. Stories help me recall things. Is the books you just mentioned, is one of them what you would read, or would you go look at YouTube videos?
Yeah, I really confused you because I didn't even mention a book other than the Pali Canon. Yeah, sorry. So Pali Canon, you can go to a website, Access to Insight, and it'll have almost all, the Pali Canon is kind of it's made up of what's called the Tripitaka, which translates to 3 baskets. And the 3 baskets of Buddhism are the sutras, which are the teachings, the sastras, which are the commentaries, and then the Vinaya, which is the moral ethical code of conduct, right? Of those 3, side note, because I'm not a scholar and I don't like all the stuff you're asking about, but I'll answer it anyways. Of those 3, teachings, commentaries, and moral ethical conduct and behavior, what do you think people tend to resort to last?
More ethical.
What do you think is probably most important?
Is it though?
Is it though? Oh, let's talk about this. Clearly you don't. What's your name? Jonas. I got it. Before I pick on someone, I got another name. So clearly, Jonas, you don't think the moral ethical conduct and behavior is important.
No, I think it's important to be ethical.
That's good. That'll help. Yeah. Let me just share this thought, and then I'll come back to your question. Carmen Lecce Soma, Tibetan Buddhist nun, for 40 years, was taught at USD. She was in San Diego a long time, just recently moved back to Hawaii. But she gave a great talk. She always gives a great talk, but one of the topics she talked about was this kind of mindfulness movement in Western culture. And, you know, for hardcore Buddhists, like the mindfulness movement is well, let me just tell you what she said. She said, mindfulness practice, you could mindfully rob a bank. You could mindfully murder somebody. Mindfulness without moral, ethical conduct and behavior is not Buddhist practice. So I shared that just to kind of plant the seed that you can't have Buddhist practice without moral and ethical behavior. You can have some form of mindful practices, but Buddhist practice is the awareness of your moral, ethical conduct and behavior and the awareness of where you're causing harm. Right? So for me, for the last 20 years, I've caused tremendous harm. For the last 49 years. And so for me, Buddhist practice has been to honestly look at where have I was going to say failed, because that's what just came to my mind, but where have I not done such a good job at my moral, ethical conduct and behavior? Because if I'm going to sit and do a meditation practice and practice Buddhism, I need to be honest with my own morality and ethics. Not that I'm not saying I'm good on them or flawless on them or even remotely close to that, but I'm honest with myself and saying, yes, you're doing a good job there. Yeah, not so much. So moral, ethical conduct behavior is super important. Back to your question, Access to Insight has the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon is the collection of those sutras, the commentaries, sastras, and the Vinaya, the Code of Conduct. And they're not really books per se, like the sutras. They kind of turn them into books, some of them. But most books that you read in Buddhism are going to be modern day, kind of Pema Chodron, Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, Chogyam Trungpa, Suzuki Roshi, more modern day Buddhist teachers who are taking the sutras and putting them in terms that maybe seem more applicable. Because the sutras themselves they're just very direct. You have to kind of read them to know what I'm talking about. But Access to Insight has all of that. Does that help?
Yeah, and then when you talk about like a number of simple truths, or I like hear a bunch of things.
Precepts?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the precepts, at the time of the Buddha, they had 227 to 311 precepts. Precepts are, do you drive? Let's just stay with Jonas. This is fun.
I do drive.
You what?
I drive.
You drive. When you come to a red light, do you stop? Sometimes. Well, you got the honesty thing down. That's good. Do you have to stop?
No.
No. Why do you stop?
It's a rule.
It's a rule. What else? Is that the only reason you stop? My guess is you've probably broken a lot of rules in your life.
I would stop.
If there's a cop around, so now we're getting more honest. If there's a cop around, you would stop.
Yes.
Is that the only time you would stop, if there's a cop there?
If I'm being honest, most of the time, yes.
Yeah. Man, we would have been buddies when we were 20. Say again?
Oh, I was just saying, what if there's a child?
What if there's a
I
child?
would stop for people.
Oh, so people and cops. Right? So here's the thing on the precepts, right? I like the red lights as an example because we don't have to stop at red lights. We could run them. We could get there quicker. We could stop. We could follow the rules and the laws. But we stop for the most part because we don't want to harm people. We don't want to harm ourselves. We don't want to harm somebody else, right? So it's there for safety. They even have a yellow light and warn you that it's about to get really dangerous for you to go through this red light. For me, the way I look at precepts are the same thing. The precepts were built not to put rules and restrictions on you. Traffic lights aren't there to restrict you. People have problems with authority, think they're there to restrict you. Maybe you. But they're not there to restrict you. They're there to keep you safe. The precepts were there to keep the Sangha, the community, safe. It wasn't like the Buddha sat down and wrote 227 laws that these people had to follow. The precepts were written because as problems arose in the Sangha, they turned it into a precept and said these things, and the first 5 are to refrain from lying, to refrain from harming, to refrain from stealing, to refrain from sexual misconduct, and refrain from intoxicants, things that alter the state of mind. Now, I don't know about you, but any time that I lied, killed or harmed, stole, got wasted, or committed sexual misconduct, lots of pain and suffering followed. But I can only speak for myself. So the precepts are not rules, they're there to keep people safe and healthy. What else? We'll do one more. Go ahead, in the back.
You spoke about training the mind
Ah.
very clearly. Is there a comparable process of training the heart?
Okay.
Could you speak to compassion?
Yeah, so the question for those who didn't hear it virtually was, I spoke very directly about training the mind, and your question is there a comparable practice to training the heart in a similar manner, and can I speak to compassion? So, what's interesting to me is in Mandarin language, Mandarin Chinese language, the character Xin is the same character for heart and mind. So I'll just start with that. Not that that clarifies anything whatsoever, but for me, learning Buddhism through Taiwanese Buddhism and in that culture, that was always fascinating to me, is that it's the same, the heart and mind are the same. Now, for me as a practice, the heart practices, well, let me start with the mind. The emotions that we carry, right? The second noble truth, the cause of suffering, as the Buddha taught, is greed, anger, and ignorance. We overcome greed with generosity. We overcome anger with compassion, to your question. We overcome ignorance with wisdom. Now, very often wisdom is associated with the mind, and compassion is associated with the heart. Buddhism says you must have both, right? Without wisdom, compassion can get you in a lot of trouble. Without compassion, wisdom can get you in a lot of trouble. So you must have both. Your question ultimately is, how do you cultivate both? For me as a practitioner, I grew up with tremendous amounts of anger in my life. So I had to cultivate compassion in my life. So I didn't hate myself and everybody else. That was what drove me to Buddhist practice. And for me as a practitioner, the way that I learned to cultivate love and compassion in my heart was from training the mind to stay present. Because when I felt anger, it was because I was upset at someone or something or myself from something that happened in the past. So I had to instantly bring the mind back to the present moment. And I wasn't, kind of same examples, then I wasn't going to the past and the anger wasn't there anymore, right? If anger arose, something in the present moment, I then had to cultivate tremendous gratitude. For me, gratitude was the way in the present, if I was angry and pissed off at something or someone or myself, I had to cultivate gratitude, appreciation, and see suffering in all beings. Meaning if somebody was pissing me off in that moment and I wanted to hate them and I wanted to punch them and I wanted to do whatever to them, I needed to see them as no different than I am, but a human who is suffering. So gratitude was the practice in the present moment to cultivate compassion, but it still had to start with the mind learning to be present, or there was no place for compassion to cultivate. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Someone like Pema Chodron, someone like Tara Brach would have very beautiful answers to that question. For me, as a Zen practitioner, it was like, you just need to stay present. That's what worked for me. So, yeah, there was a hand in the back there. No, I'm good? Yeah.
Ethics, I have no issue with. I try to be as ethical as I can.
Yeah.
As a human being. When it comes to morals, there's a little separation between that. Sometimes moral is used for judgment. What can you say?
Yeah. So I'll close on this thought. So the question was, ethics, to kind of paraphrase what you said, ethics, you don't have a problem with that, you're pretty good with that. Morals, as you said, sometimes morals are used as judgments, right? This question came up on Saturday, a similar idea around the word judgment, right? And the practice of, actually it was Sunday, but the practice of Buddhist teachings are really getting at going beyond judgment, okay? But the word you hear a lot around kind of Buddhist circles is discernment. And so this idea of we have to create if there's a fire like a fire right here, a stove, something burning. I have to discern, I have to judge, I have to know that I shouldn't put my hand on it. So, discernment requires wisdom. Now, when it comes to Buddhist practice around morals and ethics and things like that, it's not a judgment that one is better than another. Look at your actions, body, speech, mind, thoughts, words, and actions, and instead of thinking that morals are about judging, I suggest thinking about it as, are my thoughts and words and actions causing harm? Not to judge yourself or others. Someone made a comment last week about, why can't everyone just practice Buddhism? Well, last I checked, most religions teach love and kindness and compassion. The teachings are not the problem. It's all of us humans who screw it all up. Right? So, Jesus, considered in Buddhism a fully enlightened Bodhisattva, taught love and compassion. Right? But those Buddhists sure can judge a lot of people who follow the words of Jesus. Buddhists can be the most arrogant, judgmental people there are because they cling to their Buddhism thinking it's better than everyone else's. Right? But back to your question specifically about kind of morals, it's not about a scale. It's not about comparing. It's not about my morals or ethics are better than yours. It's not about, my religion teaches this versus your religion teaching that. You as a practitioner, do your thoughts, your words, and your actions bring pain and suffering to self and others, or do they bring kindness and joy? You just have to ask you. That, to me, that's what I would ask myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I can incorporate that in.
Say, last part, you can what?
So I guess what you're saying, I can incorporate that in my morals, whether it's causing self-harm or harm to others.
Sure.
If it's not, no big deal. If
Yeah.
it is, then I have to.
Again, in Buddhism, I'll really close with this thought because we're out of time here. Nobody's there's no Buddha God up there judging you. We're so conditioned to think that we're being judged by someone to get into some place. Buddhist teachings are not about being judged. No one's judging you. You are creating karma. You're creating action. And is it kind and compassionate, or is it, harmful and dangerous? So you're on your own, dude. Isn't it nice to have no one judge you? That in itself, I think, is liberating. So
I judge myself more than.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I'm sure you're not the only one in here judging yourself, right? So if we all could stop judging ourselves, it'd be a lot happier. We'd fail a lot less, We'll join palms as we close. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. All right, before y'all head out, our host Anna has a few announcements. And as Anna comes up, I have two things to say. One, 15th annual food distribution program, Thanksgiving morning on the website or flyers on the wall. We'll have a ton of people here. It's like our normal Thursday, but it'll be at 10 a.m. on Thanksgiving with a ton of people and a ton of supplies. And secondly, if two people who are relatively strong can stick around after for like 3 minutes and help me move something, that would be great. I just need 2 people. Thanks.
Hello everyone, I'm tonight's host Anna. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 18 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone with addiction, and our food redistribution program is every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it, then bring it back whenever you are done with it. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. If a few people could stay to close and latch the windows, that would be helpful. Thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you